Question is like, is basal insulin is going to control the postprandial glucose, which is commonly seen in high quantities in our scenario when compared to the Western scenario. Is that the question is right? Okay.
Correct, sir.
Yeah. So, to start with the initiation of insulin, along with the existing OADs, only you have to initiate the basal insulin. You cannot put the patient on only basal insulin, and you cannot expect a dramatic relief either in the fasting plasma glucose or the postprandial glucose, and overall put together the reductions in the A1C. This is not a miracle, okay, Praveen? So my clear mandate is the basal insulin initiation takes place only as a fourth option or a fifth option in addition to the existing OADs. Like I said in my lecture very clearly, so the patient is on metformin and the patient is on some sulfonylurea, maybe it is a glimepiride or maybe it is a glyclazide. Now I advise all the participants to just avoid the usage of glibenclamide and glipizide at least once the patient crosses 60 years of age, because of the severe hypoglycemias, and the weight gain is also like high in this particular segment. So either the alpha glucosidase inhibitors or the DPP4 inhibitors, the patient is on 3 or 4 OADs, and then only we come to a conclusion that the patient has gone into a state called pancreatic bankruptcy, that is the functioning beta cell reserve. See, I want to tell you one thing, make it one thing very clear. The time of making a diagnosis of T2DM, the pancreatic beta cells dead are 50% and live are 50% only. So, on an average, the death rate of pancreatic beta cells are 4% per annum. So, when you start the treatment for de novo type 2 DM, that is naive T2DM, newly detected type 2 DM, any damned carry combination would work. For the initial 4 to 5 years, there is no problem at all in the clinical scenario. Whether you use metformin with sulfonylurea or alpha glucosidase inhibitors, you get a prompt response because there is enough pancreatic beta cell reserve to take care of this. So that is something like a matching grant from the existing OADs and the endogenous insulin that is coming from the beta cells of this particular the human pancreas, which is still functioning. And after a period of 5 to 6 years, the annual death rate will be like more than 20 to 25%, wherein the pancreatic beta cell reserve goes down to less than 25%, and that is the state where no OAD is going to act except insulin. This is the basic principle behind initiation of insulin. So, when the pancreatic functioning beta cell reserve is below 25, no OAD would act except insulin. So, the current strategy is to start with the basal insulin along with the existing OADs, and the Asians and non-Asians, you can clearly see that there is no proper good response for a basal insulin in an Indian scenario when compared to the Western scenario. So it's always better either to start with a basal insulin and increment and maximum dose, like you start with a 10 units of basal insulin. So per se you take insulin glargine or insulin degludec. You start with 10 units, you increment 2 units, 2 units and 2 units and see the result. And wait for a couple of weeks, wait for a couple of months. The maximum dose of basal insulin, you cannot exceed 40 units of this thing. That is called the exhaustion of basal insulin. That means the basal insulin is not working for that particular patient. If the dose exceeds 40 units of either insulin glargine or insulin degludec, or even the poor man's choice, the NPH also, it is the time to go for either biphasic premixed human conventional insulins, or the affordable segment, you can go for the biphasic insulin aspart, OD or BD. That's going to make the difference all. I think I am very clear in this. And the best would be the combination of insulin, degludec and aspart. That would be the best for the initiation or the maintenance dose in our scenario, along with the existing OADs. That is very clear. You cannot take away the OADs and put the patient on basal insulin. That's a suicidal attempt. Okay. I think is that clear or any queries, please?
It was actually immaculate. There is spotless. Everything you mentioned in terms of initiation.
Yeah.
There are a couple of more questions, sir.
Yeah,
Second
shoot the question.
Doctor, which guidelines we have to follow for start of insulin initiation?
See, there is no fixed guidelines for initiation of insulin. Nothing. Even the ADA also, the American Diabetes Association, or the American College of Endocrinology, or the American Association for the Clinical Endocrinologists, or the European Association for the Study of Diabetes, or the International Diabetes Federation, they have given a flexible options for initiation of insulin, like to start with is the basal insulin with the this thing. Any guidelines you take, it is a flexible guideline. It is not a fixed frame guideline. You never find a fixed frame guideline for initiation of insulin. The earliest is the best. That's what I suggest. Earliest is the best for the patient, and for even for the pancreas, not to get into the pancreatic bankruptcy, to keep the beta cell reserve in the pancreatic beta cell live at least for a few years. You have to start the insulin in the early phase. That is the basic funda behind initiating the insulin early. That's what called hit hard and hit early with all the modalities of weapons you have in this particular segment. The basal insulin or the basal plus or the biphasic premixed, whatever it may be. Is that clear now?
Yes, sir. Indeed, it is clear. Thank you very much for the response, sir. The next question is that, doctor, can I initiate ida gas for patients first time when screened with type 2 diabetes without any OADs?
See, there is the basic principle behind this. You can start the insulin degludec plus aspart straight away to the patient newly detected type 2 diabetes if the HbA1c is more than 9%, around or more than 9%, it is an indication to start the insulin. That is by the American Diabetes Association. It has said very clearly in the 2020 guidelines. It's been there from the last 5 to 6 years also, to start with it all depends on the HbA1c. HbA1c is 9 or more, it is the time to start insulin first. And there is no specific period actually for the time limitation for insulin. Maybe that is as short as for 10 days or 20 days or 1 month. Once the patient stabilizes, that is one way. It is the initiation of insulin with insulin degludec and aspart is a wonderful option in the clinical scenario. Then newly detected with high A1Cs is that that not only reduces the glucotoxicity, brings back the hyperglycemic crisis to the normalcy, and it also gives rest to the already tired pancreas, because there is what I say is, don't whip a tired horse. If you whip a tired horse, it will collapse. So when the pancreas is overloaded, overburdened, as seen with, we cannot see the pancreas, open the abdomen and we cannot see the pancreas. But as clinicians, we are supposed to have some clinical acumen and accurate judgment when the patient requires this thing. When the patient pancreas is at trouble, when it is overloaded, when it is exhausted, it is totally tired, it is the hyperglycemic crisis indicates that the pancreas is at the worst condition. So that is the time when you have to give rest to the pancreas. So endogenous insulin should not be used by giving all these OADs. What all OADs do? the sulfonylureas, which act via pancreas basically, and the baclitinides which act directly on the pancreas. So there are exceptions like okay, the metformin will not will not act on the pancreas. It has got all the extra pancreatic actions. Metformin acts at the level of liver, acts at the level of skeletal muscle, acts at the level of fat, and the pioglitazone also. These are all called insulin sensitizers. It acts at the level of liver, it acts at the level of skeletal muscle, it acts at the level of the fat. Whereas the alpha glucosidase inhibitors, either the acazabose or the voglibose, they just inhibit the absorption of intestinal carbohydrates. So they all, the DPP4 inhibitors also, they act by inhibiting the DPP4 receptors. So the SGLT2, they majorly act by inhibiting the SGLT2 receptors which are present in the proximal convoluted tubules of the kidney. So it reduces the reuptake of the glucose by the kidneys. So with regards to sulfonylureas, which are extensively used in our country because they are cheap and affordable, because we need to pay the money from our own pockets. See, most of the times it's a combination of metformin and sulfonylurea that we are going to put. If the A1C is about 9 or 10, 11, you think, the sulfonylurea is not going to do any magic. It is going to get attached to the cell membrane of the beta cell surface. It starts squeezing out the pancreatic beta cell and squeezes out the insulin like anything. Like we have got a bore and we have got a submersible pump. We put the pump on, the switch on, it starts taking the water to the tank, and once in the due course, today or not tomorrow, if not tomorrow, day after tomorrow, the bore gets exhausted. Likewise, the pancreas also gets exhausted. That is the condition wherein there is no functioning pancreatic beta cell, and it is called pancreatic bankruptcy, that is pancreatic insolvency petition, and the patient has to be on lifelong insulin. Which is better? The patient for some time, a couple of months or 4 months or 6 months on insulin, and a lifetime insulin. I think the lifetime insulin is not a better option. Lifetime insulin is an option for type 1 DM, or for patients with GDM, or with the secondary causes of diabetes, like the patient has got acute pancreatitis or chronic pancreatitis, or the alcoholic pancreatitis, or the neoplasms of the pancreatitis, where there is pancreatectomy, or even though there is no surgical removal of pancreas, the pancreas becomes virtually useless and it will not secrete out anything. In that case, the lifetime insulin is advocated. But for type 2 DEM patients, so we can manage with this early initiation of insulin by preserving the beta cells to some more years, like 5 to 10 years or 15 to 20 years. I've got patients who have been on the tablets for the last 26 years, the day one beginning of my practice, till today they are still on this thing, because I had initiated that time when these were not available, the bovine insulin and the porcine insulin and the human mixtard or the insulatard, whatever it may be. See, our treatment should be tailor-made. It should be tailor-made. I once again tell you, one size doesn't fit all. This is the message I want to give. One size never fits all. See, you have to be individualized. As far as the counseling is concerned, it should be individualized. It is not a mass counseling. The treatment is also individualized. It is not a mass this thing. There is no hard and fast rule in initiation of insulin. And earlier the better, the best results you are going to get in the future. And the patient is benefited by insulin, early initiation of insulin. That is called the basic principle is early initiation of insulin, which is going to prevent the hyperglycemic crisis, which is going to give rest to the pancreas, which will not let the pancreas get into bankruptcy, which will not allow the patient to get into complications. So these are all the multiple benefits when we see, when compared to the cost, of the insulin, when compared to the cost when the patient lands up in either atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease, maybe it is a coronary artery disease, maybe it is a cerebrovascular accident, maybe it's a heart failure, maybe it's an acute coronary syndromes. How much is going to spend for that? When compared to the cost also, when the patient lands up in the complication, it's almost peanuts in front of that expenditure the patient is going to incur when he lands up in the complications. So it's my advice always, my take home message always is early initiation of insulin is going to do all the miracles. And later on, slowly you can add metformin if the patient, you have to ascertain first of all whether the patient is in diabetic ketoacidosis or not. By seeing the urinary ketones and the blood ketones, then you have to decide the things. If the patient is in the DKA, that is diabetic ketoacidosis, inevitably there are only three principles. The fluid balance, the imbalance must be corrected by NS. And the second, the hyperglycemic crisis must be corrected only either by the intravenous infusion of short-acting or rapid-acting insulins, or if the clinician is not able to manage this intravenous infusion, they can at least go for a subcutaneous insulin. And third being the last is correction of the electrolyte imbalance, that is dyselectrolytemia. These are the only three problems we face in DKA, that is hyperglycemia and the dehydration and the dyselectrolytemia. If we can counter these problems, the patient is out of the crisis within hours actually. So these are all the benefits. If the patient is not in DKA, then you can go for any option like, okay, what I said, the best is if the A1C is more than 9, if you have to go for insulin inevitably. And if the patient has got A1C of 7.5 or 8, you can start with metformin, or you can try with some other, but all the time metformin remains the gold standard therapy unless otherwise it is contraindicated in T2DM. Like DKA is one, acute infections is second, and age more than 80 is the third. Where there is renal impairment, the EGFR, you need to go by the evidence-based medicine all the time. Never depend on the serum creatinine, which is a very decisive parameter. All the time calculate the estimated glomerular filtration rate. Then only you will be able to stage whether it is stage 1 or stage 2 or stage 3, A, B, 4 or 5. Then based on the EGFR only, you have to use the metformin. Like if it is going below 30, it's high time you have to stop the metformin. You can no longer use this metformin. And all the time the best drug is the insulin.
Yeah, thank you very much, sir. It was so informative indeed. The last set of questions, there are 3-4 doctors. Perhaps you have
Any amount of questions I'll handle and shoot the questions. That's it.
Yeah, there are 3-4 questions on the similar pattern. What they're asking is that, sir, please do share your experience on Ida gas in insulin-naive patient. Should we reduce the dose of oral medications or should we stop sulfonylureas? What are the things we need to do while starting up the Ida gas? These are the 3-4 questions on the
same related to the same from coming from one basket only in different forms. But the main question is what is my experience? What is my clinical experience with regards to this particular insulin degludec and aspart combination? Should they discontinue the sulfonylurea? That is the main question, right?
Correct, sir.
Yeah. So the best thing is the existing OADs, if it is glimepiride or glyclazide, you can stay back with glimepiride and glyclazide and metformin, and the patient is an alpha glucosidase inhibitor, and you can add this basal plus insulin, that is called insulin degludec and aspart, that is the Rhizodec. I often use this combination. I go with the BD regime, the like 10 units in the morning and the 10 units in the night, along with the existing OADs. If it is glibenclamide or glipizide, I'll take up the glipizide and glibenclamide slowly by reducing the dose. I cannot take it away straight. And the first visit, if the patient is on 10 milligram of glibenclamide, that is 5 in the morning, 5 in the night, I'll make it half and half. And on the subsequent visit after a month or two, I'll totally take out the night dose of glibenclamide or glipizide. And lastly, I do is I take off the total glibenclamide or glipizide, and I continue metformin. I continue the DP4 inhibitor. I continue the alpha glucosidase inhibitor, which is very much, though it has not proven to be having any mortality benefits, there are CV outcomes, nothing, no outcomes with the alpha glucosidase inhibitors, except for the controlling of blood sugars. It is a useless drug actually. You can control when the fasting is normal and the postprandial is abnormal, that is called postprandial excursion is so high, that is only the indication of alpha glucosidase inhibitor. It has no any evidence based medicine to suggest that it has got some the minimizing the complications or even on the mortality rate, nothing else. Even the DPP4s also, they are almost either neutral or the CV neutral. That's what. And some DPP4 inhibitors, I tell you, so please, if it is in the case of heart failure, you please don't go for the alogliptin and the saxagliptin, because they tend to increase the incidence of heart failure, or they may precipitate heart failure. So if you want to continue metformin, it can be continued. It has got a very good role even in heart failure also, so it can be continued. And sulfonylureas can be continued, but not to that extent. I totally take away the sulfonylureas when the patient is in complication like coronary artery disease or some the heart failure, per se the acute coronary syndromes. I straight away take away some drugs. I keep the patient only on metformin and the combination of this particular insulin, degludec and aspart 2 times a day. And my take-home message is, please initiate as early as possible. You get the best results. You see the results and ask the patient to increase the dose of insulin by 2 units in the morning, 2 units in the night, and it will not let your patient get into hypoglycemia at any cost.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much for sharing your clinical experience with Ryzodex, sir.
Are the participants, Praveen? Are the participants happy with my explanation, or if there is any slightest tint of dissatisfaction, please ask them to shoot the questions again. I am here to clear all the doubts of all the participants. Whatever we will. Yeah.
Definitely you can type it on the question and answer panel. So the last question we have is that what are the specific lifestyle modification you suggest for pre-diabetes patients?
Yeah, it's a wonderful question actually. See, per se, the definition of pre-diabetes is either the category of blood sugars from 100 fasting, blood sugars from 100 to 125, that is typically called impaired fasting glucose, or the postprandial, the post glucose 140 to 199 done on OGTT only. This condition applies very meticulously, very stringently for making a diagnosis of IGT, that is impaired glucose tolerance. These two things, the impaired fasting glucose is from 100 to 125 milligrams of deciliter, and the IGT given on glucose 75 grams, after 2 hours, if the glucose values are from 140 to 199 milligram per deciliter, you can label it as impaired glucose tolerance, and these put together it is called pre-diabetes, or even one also is enough to qualify for the definition of either IGT or IFG. Some may have fasting hyperglycemia, some may have postprandial hyperglycemia. As long as it doesn't exceed 200, it doesn't touch 200, it is defined as pre-diabetes. And pre-diabetes is very important in my perspective as an endocrinologist, because the cardiovascular events are very similarly seen in pre-diabetes with regards to the established type 2 diabetes. There is no difference in the occurrence of complications, especially the cardiovascular complications. The atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease is the latest term coined for this. ASCVD is similarly seen in the same proportions in pre-diabetes and diabetes. So you find the heart attacks in pre-diabetes, you find the heart attacks in the T2DM, you find heart failures in pre-diabetes, you find the same in the T2DM, you find acute coronary syndromes in pre-diabetes, and the same you see in this thing. So pre-diabetes is the one you have to pick up the cases of pre-diabetes. When the patient is in the pre-diabetic stage, if we can select the patient, if we can label the patient, if we can diagnose the patient as pre-diabetic, and that is the time, the valuable golden hour where you can initiate the lifestyle modification, that is diet, exercise, and intensification is called therapeutic lifestyle changes. As I have mentioned, the diet, exercise, and the weight reduction and cessation of smoking and cessation of alcohol, and you have to inevitably add metformin to this particular pre-diabetic group. Metformin to start with 500 milligram sustained release at the bedtime, preferably in this pre-diabetes. So you don't need to be like what I said, the funda, strike hard, strike early, hit hard, and that doesn't work out in the pre-diabetes. You can go leisurely, but lifestyle modification and therapeutic lifestyle changes, these are mandatory for anything. So without this basement, you cannot build your castle on this. That's going to collapse. If not today, tomorrow it's going to collapse. So this particular 5 components I have said, the diet, exercise, and the diet should be like what I counsel my patients is like half of the plate must be filled with greens, that is vegetables and leafy vegetables, and 1/4 of the plate must be filled with fruits, and only the 1/4 should be with the what we take, the roti, whatever it may be, and the cereals and pulses and the millets and all these things. So one more this thing I have to mention in this regard with regards to the diet, and usually we suggest because most of the people, they don't have the habit of taking jawar roti, that is the jonna rotte actually. So the people who are not used to this jawar roti, they take more of chapatis, which is made of wheat flour. And I want to highlight the side effects and the bad effects of wheat flour, because wheat flour contains 3 major poisons, like it has got gliadin, it has got amylopectin, it has got gluten. Gliadin and amylopectin, they are addictive in nature, like cigarettes, like alcohol, like tea, like coffee, like opiates. It has got a like addiction quality in them. So these make the addiction liable in the wheat flour, and the gluten is going to damage the functioning beta cell and it kills the beta cell. So my advice, sincere advice is, ask all your patients to stop taking wheat, because there is a book written by Dr. Davis Bailey, a renowned cardiologist. He has published a book on this wheat. The title of the book is The Wheat Belly. The Wheat Belly, published by New York Times. That was the hottest seller in the US in the year 2017. Because he has highlighted all his research modalities into that book, and that has become the hotcake seller all over the world. And the wheat is going to damage the gluten is going to damage your beta cells, and the amylopectin and the gliadin is going to damage your this thing. Once you start eating chapatis, you feel like eating chapatis. That is addiction liability for chapatis. Now it's high time you have to curtail the carbohydrate quantities as well as the wheat quantities also. This is regarding diet. So more of dal, more of vegetables, more of except potato, all vegetables can be taken in abundance. There is no upper limit for that. And all leafy vegetables must be taken, and cereals and pulses must be taken. All millets must be taken. This forms all fruits can be taken. There is no forbidden fruit for diabetes, provided the patient takes. There is a guideline given by the American Diabetes Association. It can be given in moderation, like 100 grams in the morning, 100 grams in the night. Any fruit can be taken. Now, don't worry about fruits. There is all the time a misconception. Everybody says, don't eat that mango, don't eat banana, don't eat this and all. Custard apple. And all my patients happily take fruits, and they are maintaining absolute the glycemic levels and the absolute HbA1c levels. And after that, coming to exercise, it is mandatory for every Indian to go for 60 minutes of walking or cycling or jogging or swimming or playing shuttle or cricket, volleyball, basketball, any damn physical activity. It should drench you with the sweat at the end of it. So 1 hour is mandatory, 7 by 7 for Indians, whereas the Western scenario, it is only 150 minutes a week. That is, they can take 2 holidays on the weekend, Saturday and Sunday. So only 5 days they have to go for the physical exercise. That too 30 minutes is enough for them. Because they don't have the insulin resistance, the guidelines are totally different. For us, the Indian guidelines, because we are facing lot of insulin resistance in the Indian subcontinent. So because of this, the westernization, we are becoming fat and fatty, and we are growing in the x-axis like anything. The body weight is increasing abnormally. So it is high time to start walking. Whatever be the like, it should be 7 by 7, unless otherwise the environment outside is not good, that is, it is raining cats and dogs, or the patient has fallen sick, he can take a exercise holiday. But for that, there is no option at all. And third thing is, weight reduction is mandatory. The moment you start taking fiber, the moment you start taking vegetables and raw vegetables and the salads, green salads, and the more of dal, and you can take the eggs also. Now the recommended RDA, that is recommended daily allowance of eggs, is 12 eggs per week. With yellow you can take. With yellow you can take. So weight reduction must be very meticulous. Once you stop rice, you start taking some the pulses, the cereals and the millets and the salads. And all these basket of diet I have said. So patient is certainly going to lose the weight. If he just quits rice and wheat, you find this thing. Wheat is going to cause belly. Already we have got a tryptosine hypothesis. You must be all aware of it. The Indians have got the particular habit of getting a belly. However lean the patient may be, however lean the individual may be, the Indian may be, you find a small belly. That is called typically they have coined a term Indian tummy. The reason for this is called the thrifty gene hypothesis, which is which explains in the good olden days we used to have the dreadful famines. We used to run short of food at all, and days together, weeks together, many people used to die of famines and all. And nowadays, in contrary, we are going for affluent eating. But what genes have learned from the olden lessons, they have taken the take-home message that okay, in case the intake, what all we take, the food we take, okay, if it is stored in the form of fat, it can be helpful in during crisis like famines and all. That is, the energy always is in two forms. That is ready-made energy, what the body requires for the day-to-day expenditure, and the remaining is stored in the form of stored energy, that is in the form of fat. So first it starts accumulating in the liver. Each liver cell is replaced by a fat cell. That is the reason why we see this non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. That is what is generally termed as fatty liver. And non-alcoholic fatty liver leads to NASH, that is non-alcoholic steatohepatitis, that leads to pre-cirrhotic stage and a cirrhotic stage and finally a hepatocellular carcinoma. See, don't take fatty liver so light. Just because the radiologist gives fatty liver, don't take it so light, because this is linked to hepatocellular carcinoma. To start with, it's a fatty liver. At the end, the patient lands up in hepatocellular carcinoma. So the same diet and exercise, the reduction of weight, cessation of smoking, cessation of alcohol. I once again stress upon the weight reduction, because weight is the biggest disease as described by WHO, which harbors so many problems like diabetes, metabolic disorders or diseases like diabetes, hypertension, dyslipidemia. Some types of cancers are typically seen in obese people, and the coronary artery disease and the cerebrovascular disease and the peripheral vascular disease, whatever it may be. You please, even that are the say thyroid also, hypothyroid is in turn, hypothyroid causes the obesity. But once the patient comes to euthyroid levels, the obesity will not go. It is a refractory obesity, as we see in the thyroid cases. So what I mean to convey the message is, hyperglycemia begets hyperglycemia. Hyperglycemia worsens hyperglycemia. So it leads to glucotoxicity. So try to address that by means of diet, exercise, and the weight reduction, and quitting the alcohol, quitting smoking, and adding metformin to that 500 milligram. After 15 days, you go to 500 in the morning also. After 1 month, you go to 1 gram in the night, 500 in the morning. After 1 month, to 1 gram in the morning, 1 gram in the night. Even in the pre-diabetes setting, that's going to minimize and bring back the blood sugars to the tune of fasting blood sugars to less than 100 and post-lunch blood sugars less than 140 milligrams per deciliter, whereby you can prevent all the bloody cardiovascular complications, the atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease in pre-diabetic setting. That is my take-home message to all, one and all. I think, is it clear, or somebody needs some explanation, Praveen?
No, sir, it's absolutely clear. By listening to the answers, as if I felt that I was listening to an encyclopedia.
the title.
Thank you very much
Praveen,
for sharing your experience.
Praveen, the title during my UG days, the title given to me was Walking Encyclopedia.
So maybe
I was a multiple gold medalist. During my entire tenure, I was the most outstanding, extraordinary, brilliant academic student. That's it. So, any more questions?
really visible.
Any more questions? I am glad to take all the questions.
No more questions. We are done for the session. Before we close the session, sir, I would like to share a good news on Rhizodeg to all the participants who are here.
The price is slashed. Price is slashed by 30%. Okay. Okay.
Yeah, that's what, sir.
So, Praveen, I tell you one thing. Anything from Novo Nordisk, not only Novo Nordisk, anything that goes in the field of endocrinology, the update regarding the price also, that comes to me first, then to Novo Nordisk people. Okay.
Oh, great, sir. Great. Thank you very much, sir. So,
Not only this doubt regarding this particular topic. All the participants feel free to, like, they are at liberty to ask me anything and everything about endocrinology. I feel I take it an advantage to clarify all the doubts. It's my pleasure, Praveen. Let it be diabetes, let it be hypertension, let it be dyslipidemia, let it be...
Just revealing the prices, the new prices of Rhizodeg. We have reduced the price of Rhizodeg by 30%, and now the new flex touch of Rhizodeg costs around 1300 rupees MRP, and the cartridge of 300 units costing around 1024. Now with this price reduction, now Rhizodeg